Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. New set of college football playoff rankings coming out Tuesday night. Dabo Swinney, the Clemson Tigers, coming in at number 17. And the discussion is, what do we need to see from Clemson? And what do we need to see around Clemson for them to get into that 12-team college football playoff discussion? And I think if you're a Clemson fan, we said the same thing just a minute ago for South Carolina. You're kind of happy that you have that game at the end of the year. That's an opportunity for both South Carolina and Clemson to notch a real resume booster at the end of the season. And I think why that works in both of these programs' favors is we've seen the college football playoff committee time and time again kind of have that mentality of, what have you done for me lately? And if you're Clemson and South Carolina, you have a massive opportunity at the end of the year to have a statement win that is going to at least get you in the conversation of that 12-team college football playoff. Now, for Clemson, I think there's two conversations to have. One, you got to see more from them on the football field. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about Clemson having the opportunity, playing some good teams to kind of show they're a college football playoff team. I don't think you've seen that from Clemson over the last couple of weeks. You got to see them make a statement against South Carolina that last week of the season, and then what needs to happen around Clemson to get into that conversation. That's what I want to get into now. Before we do, as always, Clemson fans, appreciate you guys. Would love to hear from you all in the comment section. I think there might be some Clemson fans that are sitting here saying, Jay, we ain't a college football playoff team right now. This is too early to have this discussion. Yeah, would love to hear from y'all. Again, I think this is the only conversation to have if you're Clemson is, hey, what's in front of you? How can you control your own destiny or put yourself in the right spot to have a shot at getting into the playoffs? Let it fly in the comment section. Appreciate you guys. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, I want to start with this Clemson team because I think it's fair to say, playing Louisville, Virginia Tech, and Pitt this weekend, it hasn't really looked like a college football playoff caliber team. And what do we need to see change? Now, there's one real positive, and that is this Clemson defense. I think is starting to play really good football. Now, you could say they gave up over 400 total yards against Pitt. It wasn't a great performance. I think that poor performance from Clemson's defense in the second half had a hell of a lot more to do with the offense not staying on the football field than this Clemson defense. The one thing we've been really asking to see from Clemson on the defensive side of the football is have that front seven be a little bit more dominant, take over football games. 6 sacks, 14 tackles for a loss. That's what we were looking for. So from a front seven standpoint, you are starting to see this Clemson team take over football games like we expect them to. TJ Parker was pretty much unblockable on Saturday against Pitt. Guys on the inside were making moves. I think Jaheim Lawson played some really good football. I think Cade Dienhoff played some really good football. You saw some guys that really stepped up. The front seven performance I thought was extremely impressive. I thought the defense played really good football against the Pitt offense that has put points up on the board. I think Cade Bell's doing a great job with that offense. You gave up some yards. You gave up some points late in that football game. One, because you had some guys get kicked out of the game. You had some injuries on that side of the football. But I think more importantly, just that this Clemson offense could not stay on the football field. And that's a good segue to talk about this Clemson offense, where it starts to me with the offensive line when you are star running back in Phil Maffa, 17 carries for 17 yards. Midway through the third quarter, ESPN showed a graphic on the screen that said Clemson had 4 total yards rushing. This was a Clemson rushing attack that heading into this game against Pitt was a top 20 unit in the country in terms of yards per carry. Could not run the football worth a darn against Pitt. And it wasn't only just not running the football successfully, it was taking a lot of negative plays. You gave up 14 tackles for loss in that football game. Clemson found themselves in second and long so much in this game because they couldn't run the football, because they were taking negative plays early on in downs. That's not putting Cade Klubnik in a good spot to be successful. Phil Maffa is a good running back that probably didn't run all that good against Pitt. The bigger story for me was the offensive line. And again, Clemson's offensive line, they stayed healthy for 3/4 of the season, is now just getting decimated with injuries. Walker Parks is not a tackle. They were playing some young cats that weren't quite ready for the moment. This offensive line, in terms of especially in the run blocking department. Pass protection wasn't any better, but this run blocking department was really not good. It just seemed like the communication and chemistry was all over the place, which, kind of to be expected when you're playing so many new faces at different positions. That's got to get cleaned up because, quite frankly, that caliber of offensive line playing South Carolina in the last game of the season, that South Carolina defensive line is as legit as it gets. They got to figure out a recipe, whether it's getting guys back healthy, whether it's finding the right home for these guys on the offensive line. They can't beat South Carolina with the performance you saw from that offensive line. I think secondly, Cade Klubnik wasn't great, but I didn't think was all that bad. These pass catchers got to start doing a little bit more 4 drops on the game. That wasn't good enough either. And it's like Jekyll and Hyde with this Clemson offense and Garrett Riley calling the plays. The first half I thought was really, really clean, really solid football for Clemson. We're moving the football, putting it in the end zone. And then the second half, like they just couldn't stay on the field. They were taking negative plays. They were behind the chains. They were punting far too often and then putting their defense in bad spots. So I really do think it comes down to the offensive line. And whether that's shuffling the deck, whether that's getting guys back from injury, Clemson's got to figure that unit out, or else you're not beating South Carolina, and this conversation don't really matter. Now, what needs to happen around Clemson, if they control their own destiny, they go and beat South Carolina that last game of the season, what needs to happen? One, you want to see some chaos in the SEC, which we have seen plenty of in this conference over the last couple of years. Now, the other couple of results I'm looking at, Indiana at number 5. That is a team that I certainly think could fall out of the top 12 with an ugly loss against Ohio State. You look at Indiana's resume; they don't really have a college football playoff caliber win on their schedule. This game against Ohio State is really the only opportunity we get to see from Indiana playing one of the better teams in the country. If they lose a close game, they're probably not falling out of the top 12. If they lose a game ugly, I don't think the committee will put them in. And so that first result you're looking for is Indiana this weekend losing bad to Ohio State. I think the second result you're looking for is Notre Dame dropping a game, whether that's Army, whether that's USC. And you probably want it to be USC because if Army beats Notre Dame, Army's probably jumping Clemson and making the college football playoffs. And so you're looking for probably Notre Dame to beat Army and then lose to USC. And if that happens, a 10-2 Notre Dame team versus a 10-2 Clemson team, I think Clemson's going to have the better wins, especially if they take care of business against South Carolina. So Indiana, Notre Dame, those are the two teams that if they suffer a loss, they don't only fall in the polls, they'll fall pretty damn far. You look at Miami, I don't know if they're losing because they play Wake Forest and then a tricky game against Syracuse. But again, I think Miami wins. I think the most realistic outcomes for Clemson that could happen, that they need to happen, Notre Dame losing, Indiana losing, and Indiana losing bad. And then outside of that, you're obviously hoping for some of these ACC teams and SMU and Miami to pick up losses. I don't know if that's going to come. Look, Clemson's sitting there at number 17. There's plenty of opportunity over the next 2 weeks for one, Clemson to bolster their resume with a win against South Carolina. And there's plenty of opportunities for some of these teams in front of Clemson to drop back in the rankings. If you're Clemson, you got to make sure you're taking care of what you can control, and that is the next 2 games, Citadel and then South Carolina. And then you probably need to get lucky, which is obviously not the situation you want to be in at the end of November, but that's the situation Clemson finds themselves in. What I'm looking for is Clemson to show they're a college football playoff team. That's really all we're looking for. And then that puts yourself in a spot, but I don't know if Clemson has done that to this point in the season. They haven't really looked like a top 12 team in the country. They got to look at against South Carolina at home last week of the season. Then you get yourself into that conversation. We'll pause it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. A lot to happen, a lot of chaos that we always see unfold at the end of November. So if you're Clemson, take care of business, hope for the best. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. We'll circle back to this discussion next Wednesday as we get a new set of rankings and we see some more stuff play out. Appreciate y'all rocking with it. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.